An 8-year-old boy knelt and asked if the church was true. Nothing came. He asked every night for 10 years, and the answer arrived on his last night at home. That boy was Joseph Merrill, a future apostle. BYU professor Casey Griffiths spent 14 years in Merrill's papers and felt mentored by a man who died in 1952. Stay with us for this episode to hear how a scholar faced the hardest questions in church history and keeps his testimony of Jesus Christ. Welcome to the Why We Believe show, where members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints share their inspiring stories of faith and conversion to the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm your host, Nathan Gwilliam. Hello, friends, and welcome to this episode of Why We Believe. Today, I'm joined by a professor of church history and doctrine at BYU. He's published dozens of books and articles on Latter-day Saint history, served as the president of the John Whitmer Historical Association. He co-hosts the Church History Matters podcast and hosts Restoration Revealed on YouTube. He and his wife also collectively hold a Guinness World Record, which we will absolutely be asking about. And he's spent his career helping thousands of students face the hardest questions in church history without losing their faith. And today we find out how he has held on to his own. Casey Paul Griffiths is our guest today. Casey, welcome to Why We Believe.
Thanks, Nathan. It's good to be here.
Casey, can you start off by sharing with us something that most people don't know about you?
Something most people don't know about me. The first thing that comes to mind is I was a big musical theater guy in another life. So I did all the musicals in high school, and then I even did a little in college. I was Henry Higgins at BYU.
Oh, that's so fun.
And I came to BYU on a theater scholarship, actually. And then the next question is, well, why aren't you doing theater? It was I married my wife, and I was going to rehearsals, and I had a realization one night that I'd rather be at home with my wife than spend all night in rehearsal. Basically, I was doing theater to meet girls. And so I changed my major to history. And I can't say that my theatrical training hasn't blessed me, because it taught me to speak with confidence and,
definitely.
Perform in a classroom. It's a kind of performance. But most people aren't aware of that part of my life. And that was a valuable part of my life, but it's over. I think I'd be a little scared to step back on stage now.
So I did musical theater also when I was in high school, and then when I went to BYU, I wanted to be the next Andrew Lloyd Webber, and I studied songwriting and music composition and such. But then I hit a similar realization to you, and I realized that probably only the top 2% of people really make enough money to provide for a family. And I wasn't talented enough to be at the top 2%. So I dropped out.
See, but if you could compose, Nathan, like you had some talent and training. I was just confidently winging it my entire life. And when I did Henry Higgins and I was on the Dion Concert Hall stage and there was 2,000 people, I thought, I probably ought to go out on a high note. So that was my last major role.
So My Fair Lady, Henry Higgins is My Fair Lady, and that is a great musical. What is your favorite musical of all time?
My favorite musical of all time. Oh gosh, that is a really good question. I'm still a big fan of theater, and my wife and I go to plays on a regular basis. I think our favorite show we've ever seen is called Once. Have you ever heard of Once?
I've never seen that or even heard of that one.
It was a movie first that got turned into a musical, and all of the cast play instruments in the musical. And
Interesting.
we went to it just on a lark for Valentine's Day, and it's absolutely beautiful. Just one of those really simple, low concept guy meets girl, they fall in love kind of stories. But the music is amazing, and I listen to it all the time. But man, that's a tough question too.
So one of the best musical scores that I've ever heard is Jekyll and Hyde. And I
Yeah.
remember seeing that there in the Pardo Theater when I was going to BYU. But man, that is sure dark on stage. That's a really dark
Yeah.
production.
My
Um,
wife, my wife still does lighting design, and she was the she was the lighting designer for Jekyll and Hyde a couple years ago. So yes, it is. I'm surprised they did that at BYU. It's kind
yeah,
of
I
got
know. It was too dark
some
for my
violent.
taste. Yeah.
I thought it was good. I thought it was good, but I'm surprised to hear they did that at BYU.
If you just listen to the soundtrack, it's good. If you watch it on
Yeah,
stage, not so much. And on another fun note, Sandra Turley, do you know Sandra Turley?
I don't
Um,
know if I do. No.
Broadway singer. She played Cosette on Broadway in Les Mis, and huge, um, huge LDS musical theater performer. She booked today to be a guest on the Why We Believe show. So a fun little
Oh, okay.
coincidence there.
Well, that's something to
Our
look forward to.
Yeah,
That's a reason to check out future episodes.
that's right. Okay, can you tell me about your early journey, maybe before your mission, to become a disciple of Jesus Christ and to come to know that Jesus Christ is real?
Yeah, I grew up in a really small town where just about everybody was a Latter-day Saint. I'm from Delta, Utah, and not being a Latter-day Saint there was the exception. Like we had a handful of students in my high school that weren't Latter-day Saints. In fact, I remember in an honors assembly, one of those students getting up and praying to Jesus instead of Heavenly Father, and all of us thinking that was really weird. Like, how strange is that? And it was such a great environment. You know, the whole town was loving and supporting. I still love my hometown and stick up for them on a regular basis. And that was when my faith started to, grow. I remember in high school having like, I wouldn't say a faith crisis, just, doubts that any person has. But my doubts were never about Joseph Smith and the restored gospel. My doubts were about Christianity. Like, how do we know that this guy lived 2,000 years ago? And is there even evidence that he was a real person and everything like that? And I resolved a lot of those through things like the Book of Mormon, and Joseph Smith and modern day prophets and everything like that. So my position, I remember as far back as high school, was, well, if Christianity is true, then I think this is the finest version of Christianity. This is the version of Christianity I want to be part of, one that believes in continual revelation and miracles in our day and sees the scriptures not as something that happened in the past, but as a story that's still being told right now. So that was kind of the closest I came, I guess, to having doubts. And I remember having conversations with my friends about it, and actually, those things that normally give a person a testimony of the church and the restored gospel help me resolve my issues with Jesus and Christianity and everything like that.
I love it. Is there a specific story from your early childhood pre-mission that you'd like to share with us?
The first one that comes to mind is my parents' example. My parents both grew up in really good homes, supportive family, but a lot of my family wasn't active. And we'd go to a family gathering, and sometimes there would be people there drinking and things like that. My parents were always completely non-judgmental, and supportive of everybody in the family, regardless of what they were doing. We went to every football game and every family event that we could, to try and support him. And I grew up with that environment, learning to be really non-judgmental about people that don't live the gospel exactly the same way I do. Like, none of my relatives are bad people. They're all really good people, but a lot of them grew up in sort of more complex environments. I kind of grew up in sort of the ideal. But it was my mom and dad that they never judged. They never condemned. I remember one of my mom's cousins. It was like a cousin who had died of AIDS. This is one of my earliest memories, and going to his funeral. And this was back in the 1980s when there was a lot of controversy surrounding AIDS and HIV and what it meant and what lifestyles were associated with it. And my mom just loved that kid and embraced his family And at the funeral, I heard whispers from other people, but I remember my mom and my dad both saying, "This is family, and we support family no matter what. Doesn't matter what their background is.
I
They
love
are our
that.
family." Yeah.
You hold a Guinness World Record. Let's go there next. Can you tell
This
us
is
about that?
this is this is something I usually like to tease. I should say first, it's a mass participation record. So it's not like I did something really special, like, I can weave more vests than any. My hometown, and this is another Delta story. Our mascot is the rabbits, and a couple years ago, Delta had its 100th anniversary, and for the 100th anniversary, they wanted to do the world's largest bunny hop. So uh, they invited everybody who's ever lived in Delta and their families to come back. I went back. We had two kids at that time, and we all lined up on Main Street. And I remember they let a giant balloon go on one end of Main Street and started playing the bunny hop, and everybody did the bunny hop simultaneously. And they literally paid for an observer from Guinness to come and watch this. And as far as I know, it has not been surpassed. So yes, me and my wife and two of my children hold a Guinness World Record, along with I think 4,600 of our closest friends.
Yeah, that'll definitely be in your obituary there.
I don't know if there's another Utah town that holds a Guinness World Record, so I'm pretty proud of my hometown.
So you decided to go on a mission. Can you tell us why you decided to go on a mission and then how your life was blessed by doing that?
You know what? If I'm being frank with you, it was a mixture of things. I had a really good peer group. All my friends were going on missions. I had some really good girlfriends in high school. I remember one of them, like, I was talking to her and I said, "Well, if I go on a mission," and she was like, "No, when you go on a mission, not if." And so that helped. It was a little social pressure, but I also had a really good experience at my freshman year at BYU. I came in with not a bad testimony, but I wasn't on fire with the gospel. I got put into an apartment off campus with several other freshman young men, and they were just all great examples to me. And we were all kind of from small towns in southern Utah. There were a couple from Holden and one from Beaver and a few other places. And we just kind of mutually lifted each other up. We do scripture study together. We'd go over what we were talking about in our classes. I had a really amazing religion teacher named Todd Parker at BYU who really, really affected me. And I remember Brother Parker's only assignment was to read the Book of Mormon for 30 minutes a day. That was the primary thing you did in his religion class. And that year was really crucial for me, to the point to where I realized I wanted to, I was scared to death for a number of reasons. First of all, I'm the kind of person that's more comfortable talking to 300 people than being alone with one person. And so the scariest thing for me was not leaving home, it was being alone with one person all the time. I really had never spent more than a couple days outside of Utah, and I was pretty sheltered. But that freshman year, and the people that I ran into that year really convinced me that this was true and this was real, and that I needed to go and share the things that had blessed my life. That if I'd had such a good childhood and upbringing, I had an obligation to share it with some other people. And so it was a whole mixture of things. It was a little social pressure. It was a little obligation to my mom and dad. But I'd like to think that at the core of it was a solid testimony and a desire to want to help people and make the world a better place. So I had mixed motives. My motives got more pure as my mission went on, and I realized that wanting to be like my roommates wasn't enough to keep me going day to day. But I really genuinely believed and wanted to go and share, and I still maintain that. I'd still say the same thing today.
So, how did you make that leap? How did you make that transition to your testimony being your own?
I mean, I had some really good district leaders, and I remember one district meeting in particular in the mission field where we had our district leader just flat out ask us that. Like he said, tell us why you came on a mission and tell us why you're still here. And for just about all of us, because, it was six people, like four elders and two sisters, I think we all started out by saying we came for maybe less than pure reasons. But once we started to see how the gospel affected people and the difference that it could make in people's lives, our motives became more pure. And by the time I was done, I really did have that experience of feeling like I was doing a good thing for a good reason. That I wasn't just here because I thought all the eligible women would want to return missionary at BYU. I was there because I believed, and that's what led me into my career. Was I really enjoyed my mission so much that I thought, you know what, if I could find a career where I could do something similar to this, that would be a good life and a meaningful life.
Casey, you taught seminary for 11 years. Can you tell us about that time and how that helped strengthen your faith in Jesus Christ?
That was really wonderful too. Seminary is I should mention, because you probably have audience members who, come from outside of the Intermountain West, and their teachers are early morning volunteer called teachers, and those are the real heroes of church education. Because I grew up in Utah, I had release time seminary with a full time seminary teacher who did it for their career. And I always looked up to those people. I had a couple wonderful male, a few female seminary teachers. It's a great job. It really is. And again, mixed motives. I did it because I wanted to keep that missionary feeling where I was working on behalf of a cause that I felt was worth fighting for. A little bit of my motivation came from the fact that at least at that time, seminary teachers couldn't get divorced or they'd lose their job. So I remember thinking, if I do this as my career, that's an extra motivation to make my marriage work.
Got to treat
I,
my
I
wife well, huh? So I don't
I
lose my
gotta
job.
treat my wife well. And actually, you know what? Seminaries and institutes does a wonderful job, including your spouse. And I'm saying spouse because there's female seminary teachers too. They have when I was hired, they had these retreats. You'd go on with your spouse, and they'd have, occasional meetings where they'd bring in a marriage expert and talk about how to have a happy marriage. And we still refer back to those. We've been married for 25 years at this point. But it's still like
Congratulations.
it, yeah, it's still a joke in our marriage that at one of those early seminary teacher meetings, this guy said, "You should ask your spouse every now and then, do you feel cherished?" And they should
Oh,
answer honestly. Unfortunately, in our marriage, it turned into something that always pops up when we've had a fight or something's gone wrong. One of us will say, "Do you feel cherished?" And we kind of start laughing and we reset. But it's a great career, and I also wound up very luckily at a seminary that was huge at Alta Seminary. I think there were 11 faculty members there, and six of us were in a carpool. We all drove to work together. And so that was this, spiritual incubator too. We're on the way to work, we're laughing and we're sharing jokes, and we're planning lesson ideas. And I just couldn't think of a better career. Like I never had a moment where someone told a joke I thought was inappropriate. I never doubted the faith or testimony of the people that I worked with. All of us, and maybe this was the biggest thing, felt like we were out to change the world and make it a better place. And sometimes, that's worth that's worth more than a couple zeros on your paycheck. We teaching is not a lucrative profession, but teaching something that you believe in and that you feel like helps people makes the days go by a lot more quickly.
yeah. Yeah, you've taught a lot of students, and you've taught a lot of church history. What
Yeah.
is what is one of the most common questions about church history that you've been asked?
um, I guess the most common question I get asked now is like, how do I have a testimony, and will I lose my testimony if I study church history? Is it's one iteration of that or not? Like, should I just put this stuff away or should I dive in? And, my feeling is to dive in. I remember quoting or hearing Rick Turley, who was the managing department of the church history department, saying, "We're not afraid of people knowing too much about church history. We're worried that they know too little." And that's one thing that I picked up was when someone says, "Gosh, if I study the history of the church, is it going to destroy my testimony?" It could if you don't like commit to it fully. Like if you just start going in and do like the TikTok or Instagram version of church history, where you get a couple shocking facts and don't work to do any background or context, it really could harm your testimony. But that's knowing too little about church history. If, on the other hand, you dive in and start to embrace everything about our history, I think it's uplifting and it's faith affirming. Most people that struggle with church history, again, have this really simple idea that Joseph Smith was perfect and Brigham Young was amazing and never did anything wrong, and Emma Smith was this angelic presence that always did the right thing. And we do a disservice to all of them when we have that cardboard caricature. It's just as bad to think Joseph Smith was perfect as it is to think Joseph Smith was a con man.
Yeah.
The truth
He was
is,
human.
he was human, right? And everybody is a fully rounded person that has both great qualities and flaws. And once you learn to embrace the wholeness of an individual, I think that's when you can really kind of learn to love them and empathize with them and come to understand them. But again, it's that cardboard version of history where it's flat and it doesn't have any layers, that sometimes throws people off. And not just church history, I'm talking like all history here. If you think George Washington was always, at his best on a horse, making the right decisions, you're eventually going to run into some complications with American history. And if you read the scriptures with the view that, Moses was always perfect and never had any flaws, you're missing a huge part of the story and a huge part of the story that you're supposed to gain meaning from. Like, there's this passage in the Book of Mormon where Moroni says, "We put our weaknesses in here so that you could learn from them, like be better than us." And if you take that lens and apply it to church history, then it can be really beautiful and instructive and really helpful.
Yeah. How often we judge ourselves versus the perfect version of George Washington or Joseph Smith or these historical characters that you mentioned, right? All
Yeah.
of them have flaws. All of them had bad days. All of them were human, and we judge our worst day against their best day, and
Yeah.
and we will never measure up. And if even George Washington and Joseph Smith had imperfections, then there's hope for me.
Yeah, and vice versa, right? Sometimes if we find out that George Washington or Joseph Smith had imperfections, then the whole thing comes tumbling down around us. When in reality, no. Having someone that we can relate to because they're flawed can sometimes be really powerful. Like I remember on my mission, I loved the Savior. But there were times when I felt more drawn to Peter when I was reading the New Testament. Jesus is perfect and he always knows the right things to say. But Peter, I could relate to. Peter was, always messing up. He was over enthusiastic. He didn't have enough faith to walk on water. That's a guy that I can connect with a little bit more. And I'm grateful that Jesus Christ is there as the ideal that I strive for. We all need that ideal. But for me, it was easier to relate to someone who was trying to be better and not somebody who was already perfect. Like, I understand the role that Jesus Christ plays, but I also gained a testimony of the role of lesser, flawed, imperfect people and what they can do to help us on our path to Christ. As long as we don't hold them up and idolize them, they can be really useful stepstones on our path to hopefully eventually becoming like Jesus.
Okay, then we got to go there. Tell us a story or two about some lesser flawed, imperfect people that have helped to build the kingdom and strengthen your testimony.
Oh, well, this is one that I guess doesn't get circled around a lot, but I spent a lot of my graduate work in the papers of an apostle named Joseph Merrill. and nobody's ever heard of Joseph Merrill. I hadn't heard of him and probably wouldn't have written about him if someone hadn't pointed out that nobody had touched his papers. But Joseph Merrill was, I guess, what we would call like a second generation Latter day Saint. His dad was Mariner Merrill, who was the first president of the Logan Temple. And his dad had all these legendary, amazing experiences. Like maybe you've heard the story where Mariner Merrill was president of Logan Temple, and he looked out and he saw Satan on the lawn. And he goes out and he talks to Satan and all these people around him, and he goes, "Who are these people?" And Satan's like, "These are my people, and they're going to stop people from coming to this temple." And Mariner Merrill like tells off Satan, like this epic story of this guy who confronts Satan and doesn't bat an eye. That's just kind of the world that Mariner Merrill and Brigham Young and the first generation of the church grew up in. Joseph Merrill, his son, like loved his dad and wanted to be like him. And he heard all these stories from his dad about, like confronting Satan and, telling off the adversary. And Joseph wanted to have that kind of testimony. And he said this as an apostle, like he was very frank that when he was 8 years old, he knelt down to pray, to ask if it was true, and he got no response. Like he said, I was the same person after I finished praying as before. And then he said, and every night from age 8 until 18, I did that expecting to get some kind of miraculous experience. He's 18, and he tells this story later as an apostle, and it's the night before he's leaving home. He's going to go to the University of Deseret, which is eventually going to turn into the University of Utah, which, as we all know, would test anyone's testimony to go there. And he kneels down. He kneels down one more time to pray, and he says basically, "I was expecting nothing this time. Like I just thought, nothing's happened before, but I'm going to give it one last shot. It's my last night at home." And boom, that's when he gets the confirmation. Now, he doesn't say anything like an angel appeared to me or describe any miraculous experience. He just said, "I was blessed with a confirmation that these things were true," and that testimony has stuck with me as he went to the University of Deseret, and then eventually he's the first native Utah to get a PhD. He goes back east to Baltimore where there's no Latter Day Saints and does all of his graduate work, and that appealed to me, because I have seen miracles. I genuinely have, but I kind of operate more on the level of if I stay faithful and I'm steady, I just see good things happen in my life. And I feel like Joseph Merrill, where sometimes we don't appreciate that the timing really matters to the Lord, that we go and we ask for things. But he doesn't always grant them at the moment that we want them. He grants them at the moment that is most optimal for us to have the biggest impact. And so he's one of those figures that I came to appreciate too, because he was a man of science, but also a man of faith. He didn't have the experiences his father had, these epic confrontations with the adversary, but he gained a steady witness that stayed with him his entire life, and he just did what he did. He went out and he taught the gospel and lived faithfully and raised a family, without a lot of pyrotechnics, but that one moment when he was 18 kind of started him down the road of an entire lifetime of service.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that. And you spent 8 years collecting material on Joseph Merrill.
Yeah, from about 2007, and then the book was finally published in I think 2021. So it might be even more than that. Some of that was me working on a few other projects for a few years, but that was an amazing experience because I felt like I got mentored by this apostle. He died in 1952, a long time before I came on the scene, but I got to spend a lot of time in his papers and read correspondence between him and his wife while he was away at school, and then read his personal correspondence as an apostle, which is really rare for a person to get to do. I was lucky that his papers were at BYU where they weren't closed to the public. Normally, apostles' papers are. And I felt like he really mentored me, and he was a good mentor. And, he was when he was mission president. He had a missionary named Gordon B. Hinckley,
Wow.
who he mentored then too. And if you go back and read a lot of President Hinckley's early stories, it's like President Merrill had me do this, and President Merrill sent me on this errand. And I found out that Gordon B. Hinckley actually wrote Joseph Merrill's epitaph in the church magazine. He wrote a little tribute to him when he passed away in 1952.
So you said he was mentoring you as you were doing this project, and
Yeah,
that's very understandably. To restate and make sure I understand what you're saying, do you feel like he was helping you from the other side as you put that work together?
I do, because Joseph Merrill's big thing was living in the world of faith and living in the world of reason. So Joseph Merrill was a physics professor at the University of Utah. And he spent his entire, career in this realm of rational thought. But at the same time, he was a believer. He gained that testimony the night before he went to the university, and it stayed with him throughout his entire life. And I was studying his life while I was in graduate school. So all this stuff that I'd been raised with my entire life was kind of, again, put under the microscope, because all of your graduate training is designed basically to make you skeptical and make you, think twice before you accept something, and kind of be a deeper level thinker that doesn't just accept what you're taught. And so, I don't think I've ever had a genuine faith crisis. I wouldn't use those words to describe what happened, but it's really common for a person during their graduate education to start to have doubts. Or I've even heard David A. Bednar say, to get lost in the fog while you're embracing all these ideas. And I felt like Elder Merrill's voice was a constant guide to me, that a person could be really educated, but also be a person of faith. That the two didn't have to conflict with each other. That in fact they could be mutually supportive. Because he wrote some wonderful stuff about how he felt like science and religion were just two sides of the same coin. They were just different ways of approaching truth. That science had to do with what's empirical and what we can see in the world around us, and religion has to do with the things that we can't see, and can't necessarily prove, but that are just as real as the empirical things we can observe.
Yeah. You wrote a book about 50 relics. Can you
Yeah.
share with us one of the great stories that's buried in there?
That was a really fun book to research and write. And the one that comes to mind first is the temple swimsuit, which those aren't two words you hear very often combined, temple swimsuit. But we found out about this wonderful lady named Rosemary Reed. And in the 1940s, she was like the top swimsuit designer in the world. Like, she was designing swimsuits for Hollywood starlets, Marilyn Monroe. She was also a really faithful, active Latter day Saint. And so she designed a swimsuit to raise money for the Los Angeles Temple. And we'd heard about this because I have a colleague, Andy Reid, no relation to her, who had researched her and wrote a paper about her. She also had a lot of friends. She lived in Los Angeles. She had a lot of friends who were Jewish, and she was trying to find ways to help Jewish people connect with the gospel. So we knew about the story, and we thought this is an amazing addition. And then we actually were able to contact her relatives, and they had the temple swimsuit. In fact, they loaned us the temple swimsuit for just a day, and my brother-in-law and I, who were my brother-in-law's an object photographer. He did a lot of photography for the book. He actually brought like a female mannequin, and while everybody else was upstairs eating Thanksgiving dinner, we were downstairs taking pictures of this swimsuit on a female mannequin. It must have seemed pretty bizarre to the rest of the family. But she designed the swimsuit. Then she had the women in her relief society actually sew the sequins onto it. It's a really beautiful piece of work, and then sold it to raise funds. In fact, I think she was such an in-demand designer. If I remember correctly, the swimsuit was stolen for a little while because it was the height of fashion, and then they were able to locate it and bring it back. So, a lot of kind of weirdness surrounding that. That's the first object that comes to mind. I probably should have said something different, like the seer stone or the Jesus the Christ manuscripts. We had people come out of the woodwork in that book, really helping us find things that were amazing to put into it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing about the swimsuit. Would you share a couple of the others that stood out to you?
Yeah, another really cool thing was in my work. I've been able to make a lot of friends with people in Community of Christ. And Community of Christ had an amazing collection of artifacts. Joseph Smith's family, mostly affiliated with Community of Christ, and so this was around 2017 or so. But Community of Christ was having some financial challenges. And one of the librarians that worked for Community of Christ, who oversaw a lot of these artifacts, just called me and said, "Hey, I can't really say a lot about the situation, but if you can come to Independence this weekend, I'll let you photograph all of our collection." So all these objects. One of them was the printer's manuscript of the Book of Mormon, which you'll recall sold for like $35 million. This was just a couple weeks after that. So we went, and she was super generous. She brought out the Bible that Joseph Smith used for his translation project and the manuscripts from that translation project. A couple Smith family heirlooms like Joseph Smith's Masonic apron, we were able to take a picture of. And just seeing those things and making the history a little bit more tangible had a big impact on me. And at the time, that was a major coup that we got away with, to get to photograph all those with permission of Community of Christ, I should add. Today, most of those objects are in possession of our church, because I don't know if a lot of people realize this, but when the Kirtland Temple sold, it sold along with the properties in Nauvoo, and then this huge collection of objects, most of which I already had high resolution photographs of, because me and my brother-in-law scraped together some money and went to Independence and spent pretty much 12 hours for 2 days taking pictures of everything so that we'd have it for this book. So the book is less than 5 years old, but it's already outdated, because most of the stuff in it, that where it gives the object, then it gives it the archive that it's located in. Most of that stuff actually has been relocated to Salt Lake now. And so I don't think I'll get anybody in trouble by telling that story uh, now at this point.
So we're recording on a Tuesday. Last Thursday, I interviewed Keith Erickson, and
Oh
Keith
yeah, yeah,
was the historian who went over there, and there was 1,000 documents the church purchased during that when they purchased the Kirtland Temple, and he was the one that signed for the transfer of every single one of those documents individually, and had some fun stories surrounding that as well. So that's really
yeah.
cool. You were able to have that experience too.
Keith had some adventures, but I'll just say that Keith is the one that brought it home, and he deserves credit for that. But I snuck in 2017 and got high resolution photos of everything
Yeah, before the
before all
church
that
had
happened.
those access. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
that was
there,
pretty cool back then.
there's also a story about the Sunstone and the Smithsonian. Can you tell us that
Yeah.
story?
Yeah, there's only a handful of sunstones from the original Nauvoo temple left. Like, you can see one on display in the visitor center in Nauvoo. I don't know if it's still there, because they're opening a new visitor center. I'm going there next week, and I'll check. But one of them is in the Smithsonian, and it's apparently like a crown jewel of their collection. Like, I did a little bit of research. My good friend Alex Baugh wrote about this, the sunstone that's in the Smithsonian, but apparently it's incredibly valued by them, and it's just on a big display. Like, I had a chance to go to Washington D.C. in 2017, and I don't know if this was kosher or not, but I literally just walked in with my camera and took a picture of the sunstone, and that's the one that's in the book. So maybe I should have asked the Smithsonian for their permission. But I'm guessing at this point they won't track me down and sue me. I was just a tourist. But yeah, that's another amazing thing, is there's pictures in that book from the Smithsonian and from Community of Christ, and our church was actually really generous to work with me. And then there were a number of things from private collectors that it would take a while for people to track down and find. That
Yeah.
we really there was some cool stuff that didn't get put in the book, because only we did we the book was originally going to be called The History of the Church in 100 Objects, but our publisher said, "Nah, let's try 50 and see if people like it or not." And it did well enough that they eventually did 50 more relics of the restoration. So we got all 100 done, but it took 2 volumes to cover it.
You wrote another book building on C.S. Lewis's The Four Loves. How does studying what love means, both spiritually and historically, connect to your belief in the restoration?
Yeah, this is gonna make me really cliche, but I love C.S. Lewis. He was, he was part of that crucial freshman year at BYU. Was that I discovered his writing. I'd always been familiar with Chronicles of Narnia growing up. I think everybody was, but this is when I got into his Christian devotional writing, and I just really devoured everything from him that I could. And one of his lesser known books that I think is one of his most important ones is The Four Loves. But when I read The Four Loves, and by the way, it's a really small book. You could probably read it, in a couple hours pretty easily. He goes through the four types of love: eros, which is romantic love, and philia, which is friendship, and storge, which is affection, and then agape, which is Christ-like love. And I loved everything that he had to write, but I felt there was also a big gap. In particular, when it came to storge, that's where I sort of did my own thing. Because C.S. Lewis was a bachelor most of his life. He did fall in love and he did get married to Joy Davidman. She had cancer. She died relatively soon after they got married. And she also died after most of his literary work was done. So he wrote most of his life from this perspective as a Christian convert who was a single man. And there's only really one book called Till We Have Faces that he wrote while he was married to Joy Davidman. And so I felt like The Four Loves had this gap where it didn't talk about family. And in particular, how family fits into the larger thing. So I may have been pushing the boundaries a little bit here, but storge, which he just defines in the book as affection. Like I think he says something like storge is the type of love a dog and a cat feel for each other if they're pets in the same home, but they'll never tell anybody else about it. But when I dove into it and I talked to a couple Greek scholars on the faculty, they felt like it was okay to define storge as familial love. That it's a love that's really complex, where your family might not be your best friends, and they might not be your brothers and sisters might not be someone that you love romantically, but I felt like they were the love that sort of connected everything. That I felt like there was this big sort of hole in C.S. Lewis's discourses on it. So I spent a lot of time in that book, first of all, just making the same arguments that he made, but also adding in this unique contribution which Latter-day Saints can offer, which is the love of the family, and that it persists into the next life, and that it's something that feeds into all of them. That it's kind of interesting because you start out with the word love, and then C.S. Lewis breaks it into 4 different kinds of love, and then the conclusion I came back to was, well, it really is just love, isn't it? Like they all sort of mutually feed into each other. But the challenge we face today is that romantic love is celebrated. But today we don't always celebrate things like philia or storge or familial love, and we definitely don't give enough credit to agape. Like it, sometimes, being loving towards your enemy, for instance, is seen as stupid or weak, and yet all of them have this dimension to them. And the argument I was making in the book was that yes, romantic love is important, and of course Latter-day Saints, because we believe in eternal marriage, have sort of hoisted up romantic love as being crucial, but that all the loves really matter, that the happiest people are romantically fulfilled, but they also have a lot of deep friendships, but they also work on their relationships with their family. And most importantly, they strive to be Christ-like, because if you master Christ-like love, then the other ones tend to fall into place.
Yeah. What's a story from church history that almost nobody knows, but you think every Latter-day Saint should hear?
It's actually a story that I included in the Four Loves. It's a really simple story, but Parley P. Pratt was one of Joseph Smith's dearest friends, and he loses his wife. He almost apostatizes from the church. He gives a speech where he rails on Joseph Smith, says he's a false prophet, and is about to leave the church. when this convert that he had baptized 6 months before shows up in Kirtland. And, he walks up to this convert and basically says, "You shouldn't have come here. Joseph's a false prophet." And the convert looks at him and says, "You told me 6 months ago that he was a true prophet. If he was a true prophet then, he's a true prophet now. You're the one who's wrong." And it's more complicated than just one conversation, but the convert's name is John Taylor. And I use this as my example of a filial relationship, a friendship, to where they become friends because Parley brings John into the church. Then John saves Parley from apostatizing. Then they become co-apostles together because shortly after, John Taylor's called them to the quorum of the 12. They write each other poems for their 50th birthdays. So in one of Parley P. Pratt's books, at the end, there's a poem that he writes for his 50th birthday, and then John Taylor writes a response. And we just don't see very many positive examples of male friendship like that, where you could walk up to your friend and say, "Hey, it's your birthday, so I wrote you a 28-line poem," and it wouldn't be seen as weird by us. But in the 19th century, and really until, I don't know, the last couple decades, male friendship was enshrined. Like, it was a really, really beautiful, great thing. And then we started to emphasize romantic love so much. Not that romantic love is bad, we just overemphasized it a little bit, and we neglected this idea of friendship and family that goes along with it. So I wish more people knew about John Taylor and Parley P. Pratt and their friendship. Like, I wish everybody
That
had read
familial
that
love between men. I love that.
yeah, this platonic love or filial love, between men, as one of the real things that makes you happy.
Thank you so much for sharing your stories, your faith, your testimony with us today. So, Casey, tell me, why do you believe?
Um, that's a good question, and I remember hearing Richard Bushman once when he was asked why he believed. Pause for a second and go, "It makes me a better man." And I remember at the time I was pretty young, and I remember thinking, that's a lame answer, man. Like, it just makes you a better person. Why aren't you talking about, like, the Hebraisms in the Book of Mormon, or the witnesses of the Book of Mormon, and how they never denied their testimony despite all the pressure, or the complex theology of the restored gospel? I remember at the time thinking, that's a weak answer, but that's the first answer that comes to mind. My life has not always been easy, but living the gospel of Jesus Christ makes me a better person. And that, first and foremost, is why I believe. Now, there's a lot of stuff from church history that I've studied that has strengthened my testimony and that has helped me gain a more firm witness that this is the true church of Jesus Christ. But on a fundamental level, I live the gospel day to day because I think it makes me a better person. I think it helps me strive to want to be better and do better and be the sort of person that people around me expect me to be. When you're a religion teacher, everybody seems to think you're perfect, but I have a lot of problems. I live the gospel and I believe because I've seen the fruits of the gospel. It genuinely has made me a happier person, given me a great family, a great life, and a reason to get out of bed. Like, it gives me something to fight for on a regular basis, and it gives me a little hope that the world can and will get better with the help of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what the gospel is all about. And that's why God does what he does, is to help us be better and help us have a better life and help us be more like him. Thank you for being with us today and for sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
And here are my key takeaways from this episode. Number one, God answers in his timing, and a 10-year wait can anchor a lifetime of faith. Number two, disciples of Jesus Christ can hold faith and reason without conflict. Number three, knowing too little church history harms testimony. Embracing it fully builds it. Number four, the weaknesses of prophets and saints point us towards Christ, not away from him. And finally, number five, the gospel of Jesus Christ proves itself in its fruits. Casey's story shows us that deep study and deep faith belong together, and that God builds his kingdom through imperfect people. If his journey through the hardest questions of church history has helped lift your faith in Jesus Christ, please take a moment to share this story. You can leave a rating and review for Why We Believe and add a comment telling us which part of Casey's story resonated most with you so more people can find these stories. And I invite you to visit whywebelieve.com to download your free guide with 13 strategies to increase your faith in Jesus Christ.